Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really wonderful to have you here. My name is Claire. I'm the managing editor of Restaurant Business, which is a new online publication for the Australian hospitality industry. I'll be your host for this morning's session. And we're really excited about today's conversation because it touches on something that every leader in frontline industries is grappling with right now. And that really is, how do you embrace the future without losing sight of the people at the heart of your business? So, before I introduce our fantastic speakers, I want to give a quick mention to our presenting partner, the Restaurant and Food Service Show. This takes place at the ICC in Sydney this May. If you work in hospitality or food service, I would strongly encourage you to check it out. So let's get into it. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping actually first. So this session is being recorded. If you registered but can't stay for the whole thing, or you want to revisit anything afterwards, you'll be able to access the recording. To minimise interruptions, your microphone in the audience is muted. Chat and raise hand functions are also off. There will be a Q&A with Kat and Dan after the presentation. And thanks to everybody who submitted questions ahead of time. So we'll put those to our two brilliant speakers. As I said, we've got two really excellent experts joining us, and I'm really delighted to introduce them. So first we have Dan Shorbell, who's the managing partner at Workplace Intelligence, a research and advisory firm focused on the future of work. Dan is a New York Times bestselling author and a globally recognized voice on workplace trends, employee engagement, and what organizations need to do to stay ahead of the curve. So welcome to Dan. Also joining us is Kat Argyle, product manager at Deputy, a leading workforce management platform built specifically for shift-based and frontline teams. Kat brings a practitioner's lens to how technology can be designed and deployed to genuinely serve workers, not just operations. And it's really great to have you here too, Kat. So before I hand over to them, we really want to sort of understand your sentiment towards AI in your day-to-day work currently. So a poll should be appearing on your screen for you to answer now. And the question is, how comfortable do you feel using AI tools? And that might be ChatGPT. You might be further along your journey using something more advanced. But it'd be really great to kind of get a sense of, sort of where people are at. And also great for us to sort of feel like we're all in it together too. So we'll just give you a second to answer that poll. And we can see sort of some of the results coming in, a real sort of span of selections. I think it's sort of really fascinating to see how many of us are in the same position when it comes to using AI. And I think this makes our presentation today all the more valuable. Dan and Kat are really going to help us understand how AI is reshaping frontline roles. We'll explore some practical strategies for integrating technology into ways that empower rather than alienate people, and share how leaders can build a culture where both humans and technology can thrive. So I'm going to jump out. I'm going to pass over to Dan, who's going to get us started.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm looking at the poll right now. Not overly surprised. I mean, with the amount of votes we have, it's definitely skewed to, aware of AI and have used it sometimes. We don't have that many masters of AI yet, but, of course, over this session and throughout the rest of the year, I am sure that you'll be using it more and more as organizations kind of push for the use of AI and more frontline workers adopt these tools in their day-to-day operations. So I'm sure if we do this poll another year, the results will skew a bit higher. Just for a little bit of context, we partnered with Deputy on this big global study. 1,500 hourly workers. The study is called Better Together, How AI and Human Connection Will Transform Frontline Work. It is already starting to transform frontline work. It's definitely transformed desk-based work. And it's the biggest topic in the world. Let's be honest. AI is, you cannot go online and search and not see AI articles and commentary on news stations and everywhere, regardless of where you are, in the world. So this is a topic that cuts across every organization, every industry, every profession. It affects us all. So that's why it's a very unique topic in a very unique time period. We've been doing research on this since 2017. It's 2026, and I'm sure there will be continued interest over the forthcoming years. But what makes the Frontline unique and special is that their reactions based on our findings are very different than desk-based workers. And I think that will shine through as I walk you through the findings and the applicability to your company and your industry. And I think what's also really unique and I think valuable is the industries we focused on for this study have a very high percentage of frontline workers. I mean, we're talking about hospitality, retail, and food service, in healthcare. I mean, this is where you're seeing a big amount of frontline workers, and they're feeling AI's impact firsthand, right? Because AI is having an impact on people's speed, customer interactions. The customer is using AI. Therefore, AI matters when it comes to, the frontline workers and how they interact with customers. So that's completely changed, and I think that's something that will continue to be a very big factor moving forward, because just like anything else, when employees adopt AI or managers adopt AI, employees do, and younger workers adopt AI, older workers tend to. So everything kind of impacts everything else. And we look at demographics later on in this presentation. I think there's some really, really good insights there that might have been overlooked in the past, but we're going to be spotlighting here today. And the study is very fresh, obviously global, and covers these key industries. Something interesting about the Australian data specifically, it's really a good snapshot because it's right between the US and the UK, both in terms of adoption and sentiment, in terms of how these workers are viewing and feeling about AI and its impact on their daily work experience and life. And the thing that shines through yet again, in terms of every time I presented this to the US audience and to the UK audience, and it's the human touch really stands out. I mean, let's be honest, frontline workers, they were during the pandemic, the essential workers. They are the, people who are interacting directly with customers. They're on the front lines. They're, in physical spaces. They're not working remote. And so the human touch is essential. The human touch is their job. And that's very different than a desk-based worker who's interacting almost primarily through a computer. And because of that, it just turns out uniquely that desk-based workers' jobs are a little bit more at risk than frontline workers. So we found that 66% say human touch is essential. Actually, when I presented earlier today, that number was a bit higher. So that's interesting. And 60% strongly believe that empathy cannot be replaced by AI. And honestly, I think it should even be higher than that, right? And it was earlier today when I talked to the UK audience. Workers are generally open to AI, but I think that in terms of adoption and usage, communication is really important, and transparency. Making these frontline workers understand what AI can do, what AI can't do, and thinking about a frontline worker's day-to-day responsibilities. Let's say if they have 10 or 20 tasks, which tasks can AI augment or replace or automate, and then which ones can it not? Because really the main message of AI and the promise of AI for many years now, since I've been talking about this, is automating repetitive tasks that are better done by machines than humans. A lot of people, if they want to know where the gym is in the hotel, for instance, a chatbot will do, and we'll direct it to them, and even very, very quickly, instead of them having to go up and get that courage to talk to somebody. Whereas other things, cannot be replaced, like more involved conversations and certain tasks can't just be automated. We don't have some super robot right now that can do that type of work. And so we need to lean more into that on both routes, on more into technology when it makes sense and more into humans when it makes sense. And that's kind of a big lesson and message that I'm trying to harp on today. I think it's really important. Again, it's humans and AI working together, as a cohort, as a team, to be able to accomplish tasks in a more efficient but also a human level. If AI is just kind of showing up out of nowhere, if executives are just saying, hey, use AI for the sake of using AI, not a good strategy. And that we've seen a lot of. I mean, I think that things are changing this year, right? It's a little bit less hype and more about application and being thoughtful around usage. And so it's really less about technology, less about even AI. AI is technology, and more about how it's being introduced. Because if it's introduced in the right way, and if there's training and transparent communication, there's going to be more adoption, there's going to be more usage, there's going to be more understanding, less confusion, and less fear. So we have a lot of data here, of course, but I think the big takeaway is that AI is being used in about half of workplaces, right? So this is still somewhat new. And if you look at the responses to the poll question, somewhat reflects that. This is something new. A lot of people are using AI maybe outside of work and have not brought it into the workplace yet. That will change. We saw that with Bring Your Own Device many years ago when people were using iPhones outside of work and their company was, pushing Blackberries or no phones. And then eventually, the smartphone and iPhone made its way into the workplace. So that transition has always happened, and I believe will continue to happen, especially with AI. If you're using ChatGPT or Claude or another tool outside of work, eventually your company either promotes those tools or you end up just gradually just using it because it just makes sense, and you end up solving problems for yourself, which then other workers see that those problems are being solved, and they're like, oh, I can do that too. And I think that that's another key message is, find your champions in the workplace, find those, tenured workers that, you want to empower with AI and equip them with it, because then they'll help increase the adoption in the company. They'll supercharge it because they're already respected, and they can be kind of case studies and leaders when it comes to AI. And we've done a lot of work around AI champions too, and that's how it typically plays out. So back to more of this research. The majority say empathy cannot just be replaced, which makes perfect sense because it can't. It's basic humanity. Anything that's really human, I mean, until we become cyborgs, is not gonna just be eliminated. Human touch is essential as well, and these workers, relative to desk-based workers, like I was saying earlier, they're not really afraid of AI automating their jobs because they see that it can't be automated. They're experiencing this firsthand, and they're thinking, oh, you saw in the news or you read an article or your friend told you, hey, AI is starting to, turn into job loss, and you're thinking about your day to day, and you're like, I can't even see that happening. So I think that's more or less the attitude. And I do believe that coming out of the pandemic, when frontline essential to operations, people just saw, hey, you can't just replace us, or you probably would have already, and you need us. So I think that attitude is part of the reason why we've gotten some of these results. Frontline workers are optimistic. They're very optimistic about AI. They see their value from a human standpoint. And it's just not the same data point and findings you'd find from desk-based workers. And we have interviewed desk-based workers, we've interviewed managers, we've interviewed IT leaders, we've interviewed the C-suite about these topics too, about AI-related topics. So yeah, from a general standpoint, this is a very optimistic group. But I think one of the interesting things is it's still early. 25% personally use AI, 23% say AI exists at work, but they don't use it at all. So it's still early. And I do think that the 10% that simply don't know is an important finding, in a sense that the best technology is the technology that's so embedded in what you do that you don't even think about it as technology. You just kind of take it for granted. That's when you know it's effective. And I think you're seeing that more and more because all technologies are being powered by AI or will be powered by AI. Every company that's not a technology company is becoming a technology company because of the demands of AI. So with all that transformation, I just think it's people aren't even going to be thinking about this as AI in the future, and I think the frontline workers might not even care that it's AI. They just want, they have certain things they need done. And if it helps them get it done, it does that, whether it's scheduling, communication, all these different important things. And, and I think that's how they look at it. And so it's still early as even though there's been so much hype and there's been so much talk and so many marching orders about AI. I mean, we're just still really, really maybe in the second inning right now, if you want to use a baseball analogy. Um, Burnout is still a big topic. We've been looking at burnout for many, many years when it comes to the frontline workforce. These shift-based workers they're working maybe overtime. Um, One of the Australian nurses that was interviewed for the study said AI helps with admin, but when I have 12 patients and six need urgent care, no technology fixes that. I think, especially with healthcare, unless there's some crazy robot that comes out that can, be a nurse. I know in the U.S. especially, the most in-demand profession since I started my career and probably even before is nurses. They can never find enough nurses, and nurses are probably one of the last professions to get replaced by AI if that even happens. So again, I think what the really key message here is AI can't do everything. It's being sold sometimes as this can solve everyone's problems, business problems, personal problems. The reality is there are shortcomings. It can't do everything, and I think that message is important for the front line because if you have patient, these people are the expectation is that a human is helping a patient in a hospital. So I think expectations is a really key consideration here too, because if the expectation is that the human's going to be supporting somebody and there's no human there, there's a lack of trust. But if there's both, then the trust can build on, build. It could be you could trust it more because you'll see that the company is innovative because they're using technology, but they also recognize that having, in this instance, a nurse is kind of required and expected. 40% of AI users say uh, that AI reduces stress and burnout. And of course, that's because it creates efficiencies that allow people to kind of buy back their own time so they can do things that are more high impactful, like talking to customers, talking to patients. Because, a nurse having to waste time on, let's say, paperwork and various things, that's less time that they can spend with those, in this instance, 12 patients, where they can add a lot more value and make those patients feel very comfortable in that hospital, in that position, whatever illness they might have. Um, and AI can help with these administrative tasks, all the scheduling chaos that happens, the staffing inefficiencies, and all these things do contribute to burnout, along with obviously long hours and the nature of work. Let's be honest, if you're in a hospital, if you're in certain environments as a frontline worker, it's very exhausting and you're in an environment that can kind of drain you and it's into itself, despite even regardless of what you're doing on a daily basis. So that leads to attrition, of course, as we know, and some of these industries, especially hospitality, the attrition rate is historically very high, and so preventing burnout and using technology in that way to at least decrease it is going to be a good way to retain workers. I think the universal finding that is pretty unanimous. It should be 100% for both, not 98, 94. Let's be honest. Is you can't really replace the human touch, especially if you're a nurse, if you're in some of these positions. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, will AI be used in those situations, in those environments? Yes, but it's just not going to replace it like it would replace some sort of administrator at a tech company, let's say. Um, and so, frontline workers, do you see AI as a strategic partner and not a replacement for relationships? Because again, these frontline workers do realize and understand that the nature of what they do is not, you're not going to just delegate that to a robot that can't function and handle a lot of these tasks and procedures on a daily basis. It's just not going to happen right now. Will it happen in 10, 20 years? I mean, the future is very unknown, but right now it's really hard to prepare for that. And if you think about deputy AI, it really fits into this whole philosophy because its value comes from improving operational clarity and freeing up time for these frontline workers and allowing managers and staff to respond to customers, patients, guests, all these different stakeholders more fluently and more efficiently, which is really what's important here. It's making the overall employee workplace experience better, more efficient, more functional. So it frees up time, but not at the cost of the customer. Frontline workers, contrary to what all these headlines say, they're not worried about job loss via AI. Only 9% see AI as a likely job threat in the next 5 years. So even though we know there's going to be massive change in the next 5 years, there's going to be massive change in the next 6 months. Let's be honest. They're just not fearful. They just are looking for more communication, some clarity around AI, best practices, more communication. Retail workers especially show the highest demand for transparency. One worker that was interviewed said they put in self-checkout without even telling us why. That means a lack of transparency. You don't want these workers to be caught off guard and saying, why is this new system here? Or why is this new tool? And, I don't even have the training to use these tools. And so I think that's really important because then trust is lost and it's very hard to gain that back. So rolling out the technology, like I was saying earlier, is really important. And involving the frontline workers throughout the process is key because then you can get feedback and you can kind of see as you're rolling out AI, what's working, what's not working, how the frontline workers are interacting with it, and then you can improve it. And if you're working with a technology vendor, for instance, you can say, hey, this would be better for us or our workers. And I think that that's the best way to do it instead of how a lot of companies have done it is use AI or we replace you, right? Like there's been a lot more demands of workers over the past 6 months to a year instead, and this whole like use it or use it or there's, kind of a punishment or penalty, like that's not the right way to do it. Instead, it's okay, what's going to work best in this environment. Let's get training together. Let's communicate this properly. Let's get feedback along the way. But you could say that about any technology tool. So whether it's AI or not AI, it's about how you present things and manage it through a process. We looked at different demographics and different industries, and this data is pretty interesting. We looked at food service, and food service values operational efficiency, but protects customer interaction. Not that surprising. Hospitality, they're worried about exclusion and job security, which makes sense. I mean, there is a little bit more fear in that industry versus others. Healthcare welcomes administrative support but resists clinical replacement, which makes sense. In healthcare, they can't stand administrative work because it just has piled up over the years, and it's just kind of almost like it's important, but it's a little bit more of a distraction. So if they can automate that and then spend more time with patients and doing kind of more the clinical work, that would be ideal for them. And retail, it shows the most mistrust around AI and the lowest optimism around the future. And I think if you think about these industries, retail is more likely to be disrupted by AI and have job displacement than the other industries. Um, yeah, I think it's because just customer expectations are changing significantly. A lot more people are, shopping virtually and whatnot. So I think that there's definitely a variable with retail, much less so with healthcare. I mean, I think healthcare is the other extreme where you got to interact with the person. The person is what you trust. This person went to this person is like helping you live or die, right? Like it's just a totally different thing. And that human care and empathy, especially when people are not doing well health wise, I think is really, really critical. And there's really no universal AI rollout strategy. There's, across, because even across different companies, across industries, there's just a lot of variables because every company is slightly different, every culture is slightly different. So you have to really assess your specific company and the people who work there. We're going to get to the generational differences, tenure differences in a bit, because the makeup there might be similarities, but there's going to be differences, and you got to really take into account everything when you're talking about our rollout of a new system. And Deputy AI supports this by focusing on operational improvements that align with frontline realities. Really capturing the real-time staffing adjustments that happen on a regular basis in food service or labor compliance support in healthcare and retail. And having a really good technology partner is key to navigate all of these changes because it is a lot and a big undertaking to really transform your workforce and how it operates. As I was saying before, we looked at generational differences. Been looking at generational differences for many, many years. Um, Gen Zs historically, and what we found in the study is they're optimistic but a little bit uncertain. And this is at a time, especially in America, where a lot of these Gen Z jobs are just disappearing, especially from a desk-based worker standpoint. But Gen Zs are still young, and they're thinking, this, could be a big thing, especially if Gen Zs adopt it sooner, which is what's been happening. If they can use the tools effectively, they'll get ahead faster and have a little bit more job security. But they also recognize that because they're young, they might be optimistic, but it's also there's so much uncertainty because it's not like they're 80 years old and have to worry about what happens in 10 years or 20 years. So I think that's it's this balance between optimism and uncertainty is pretty interesting with that generation. Millennials, they're more practical adopters. Like I was saying, like there's so much hype on AI, but a lot of people, especially millennials, are saying, okay, well, how do we actually use this? Like, you can give us the tools, you can say how great it is, but how does this change my day? What is this actually going to help me with? Gen X, more skeptical, which is historically how Gen X is across everything, and more data driven. And I think that the whole data driven aspect is very, very key because, I mean, the data exists more and more now, right? And so, people want to know how their data is being used. People want to use data in order to solve problems and understand the effectiveness of a tool, that's being used. What are the outcomes? Boomers are very strong defenders of empathy. Not very surprising because they grew up at a time when there was no real technological revolution, there was no smartphones. They built careers based on human relationships, and because of that, they know the power of empathy and various soft skills that are less likely to be automated and replaced by AI and are the key to a successful frontline workforce now and most likely in the future. And so AI, it really revolves around tailored communication and understanding who your audience is and employee base is, to be able to cater and be able to communicate and equip these workers with the tools and the know-how they need to be successful. And then this one is really interesting. It's something that we really haven't looked at too much in the past. I was really interested in tenure. And actually, it was like I was saying earlier, it really got interesting in terms of these people who are long tenured at a company. They're the leaders. And that might not be surprising, but knowing that they're the leaders and knowing that we have this finding shows you that these are people who can preserve company culture and empathy and human connections. And these are also the people that, if they adopt AI, will help radically change the organization and workforce and AI adoption, because they're the ones that can be the champions of it. And I think that's, if you want to roll out AI, they are really the key players there, because they also know how things get done. And when you equip people who know how to get things done, they can give you good feedback in terms of tool usage. And they're the ones who can say to the other workers, the non-tenured, the ones who've been, at the company for 6 months or so, they can say, hey, this is how I'm using it. You might want to try it, or you should try it. And that can start to compound, and you can get your whole workforce to use it. And you'd get, obviously, if more companies did that, you'd get results that were even higher in the future for a study like this. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that we looked at was this whole two-tiered workforce. And it was interesting because during the pandemic, we looked at the two-tiered workforce as the essential frontline workforce versus desk-based workers. And here we're looking at it actually in a unique way: part-time workers versus full-time workers and casual workers. And it's interesting that we kind of found something similar in this regard, where these full-time workers are getting more of the communication tools, the know-how, and whereas people who aren't putting in as many hours, they're kind of being left out. And the divide can really hurt service quality, employee confidence, and retention. And that's why you need to have a kind of an inclusive rollout, so that everybody, full-time, part-time, doesn't matter how many hours, is involved and is part of the conversation. And Deputy AI helps mitigate this by providing centralized communication, scheduling clarity, and mobile accessibility, which will ensure that part-time and shift-based workers receive the same visibility and support as full-time staff, bringing everyone together. And that is the beauty of technology. It's the great inclusion tool, right? Everyone, as long as everyone has access to the tool, everyone's on the same playing ground, right? Everyone can kind of communicate and use the tool, and this equal access is part of the reason. Technology is part of the reason why a lot of hierarchies within organizations have collapsed relative to 10, 20 years ago, is because of technology has flattened organizations in that respect, which I think is pretty interesting, and you're seeing it more and more. The last demographic area we looked at was gender. Women dominate healthcare and hospitality. Empathy is central, and men are more represented in retail and food service, where efficiency metrics often dominate. So it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. I mean, the industries that are more female versus male dominated, but it is a consideration. It's a consideration because, obviously, men might be more in tune with AI, so maybe a little bit less training. Women might need more training, based on kind of these results and everything else I've seen. But at the same time, women are kind of primed for success because they lean into empathy and various other soft skills even harder than men, that are relying on some of these kind of tools and ways, and some of this technology that is kind of automating or making some of their work more efficient. So women are a little ahead in that respect, I say. And really, the implication is that AI messaging and implementation should highlight different value propositions depending on your workforce composition. And you see that across all these demographics. So, if there's one theme that you want to really focus on and take away from this presentation, it's that frontline workers are not resisting AI. They're resisting being excluded from using AI, and they want to you got to make sure that it's communicated what AI's job is, right? What its actual practical use is, and that's reducing administrative burdens, improving schedule predictability, enhancing communication, and preserving human interaction. It's eliminating the work that is tedious and not as much of a value add, and takes them away from customer conversations and relationship building. Because then they can invest more time in the things that are going to be better for your business, better for your workforce, kind of playing up to their strengths and what makes them unique, and less likely to have their jobs automated is empathy, their humanity, customer interactions, relationship building. So removing other things where the customer would want those being removed anyways makes perfect sense. And now Kat and I will be taking your questions live. Really excited about this.
Great. Thank you, Dan, for that presentation. I'm really excited to sort of delve a little bit more into the research and your findings. We had some questions submitted ahead of time, which is just really great. So one of the things that you sort of mentioned in the research is that the thing that I kind of took away from it is that, frontline workers are really quite sort of cautiously optimistic about using AI. And obviously, in an industry like hospitality, that experience of eating out, the sort of the entire experience just, can never be replaced by, AI or robots. Always going to be a human-led experience. But obviously, the sort of, sort of people are quite cautious about how it's implemented in the workplace. What's the sort of role of trust that an organization might need to maintain as they kind of introduce more automation into those frontline roles that you sort of on the surface would expect that they're kind of protected because of the the sort of human experience?
Well, you just have to I always put myself in a frontline worker's shoes, right? And if you think about it, you've had a similar work, pre-AI, you've had a similar work experience for so many years. The expectations are, do you do these 10 things every day, right? On a consistent manner. And that's good. That consistency, you start to trust your environment, you have less fear, like anything else. If you eat this, I eat the same thing every day. My wife, it drives my wife crazy, but it makes me more efficient. I don't have to what's for dinner. I don't have to think about that. It's just, it's the reason why as you age, my parents and my grandparents, they did the same thing every day, or the same X amount of things every week, right? And that alleviates fear, and they're getting older and they don't want to have to stress out about things. So that's like kind of like the human condition. People fear what they don't understand. They fear change. And so now you're telling a frontline worker who didn't have to interact with this technology for their whole careers, let's say, now has to, or has part of their day is kind of disrupted or changed because of this technology. Well, that's going to kind of potentially break trust. That's going to create fear. They're going to be worried a little bit. So that's kind of the mentality of what's happened. And this would be with any technology, whether it's AI or anything else. And so because of that, your job as an organization, as a leader, is to kind of alleviate that stress and improve that optimism and confidence. And to do that, it's like I was saying earlier on, it's about how it's being introduced. And the big flaw right now, and we even did a study on this last year about AI being overhyped. And part of it is because it has been presented as a solution to everyone's problems, personally and professionally. And it's not true, right? And so by explicitly saying, this is the tool or tools we're going to be using, here's why, here's how it benefits you, here's the aspects of your day that might change, and here is why that matters. Like, that is what's going to build trust and
Mm,
allow you to grow trust, because it's not like in 5 years, again, they're not worried about AI in 5 years, as they said in the study. you know the future is very unknown. But we know we're going to be using more technology 5, 10, 20 years from now than less technology. I think that's a pretty safe bet. And because of that, it's about constantly getting their feedback around their tools and their experience with them and what's working, what's not, and just like working with them as their job transforms. And I think
yeah.
that is the right approach. And it takes into consideration this personalization that I've been talking about, especially when I went through the demographic data. It's slightly different for different generations. There's some consideration for older, people, more tenured workers, different genders. There's all these intricacies, and it's
Mhm.
also a little bit different based on the nature of your job. And because of that, I think that there needs to be kind of careful considerations, communication, transparency, all the things I was talking about.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, for sure. So I've got a couple more questions for you, and then we'll bring Kat into the conversation, who's patiently waiting there. So we know that obviously burnout, really just remains quite a major issue, and it's something that we see a lot on the front lines of hospitality. It's an industry where we're working long hours. Someone can't make it in for a Friday night shift. You've got customers who, might be sort of being a bit difficult. There's lots to navigate. And, whilst AI can help with some admin tasks, it obviously can't solve systemic staffing shortages. Where do you see AI delivering kind of the most meaningful relief from burnout? And where might its limitations be with that?
Great question. Burnout it was named an occupational phenomenon. I think it was like now 5 years by WHO. And we did a huge study on it even before that showed that, that's almost an epidemic of sorts, right? And it's because right now there's such a march to more productivity. And with AI, you almost can't mention AI without talking about efficiencies or productivity. So it's either efficiency or productivity becomes like the next word that people say, because that's kind of the outcome that executives present and what kind of the market wants. And so that has put a lot of pressure on workers. And so using AI in a thoughtful way, not just to try and do everything, but to really reduce the administrative burden. And a lot of workers, whether they admit it or not, they don't really want to do that type of work, right? That's not the meaningful work that they have, right? Having a conversation where a customer is like, feels better after that conversation, or lives longer, or whatever that might be, that's going to be much more impactful, right? Also, schedule predictability is really key, because, as you know, it's like people want to know when they need to work. They want to be able to shift work with other workers, and because people's lives, it's been very disruptive over the past several years, from also from an environmental perspective, a geopolitical perspective. I mean, there's just so many disruptions and craziness economically. Like, there's so many aspects to, pandemics. There's so many things that have shaken up the workforce. And so people are in different situations. People need to kind of balance their shifts. If AI can help do that, that's going to be really important. It's going to be one thing that's going to lower stress, increase trust, and workers feel like the company kind of cares, and that they can have a little bit more flexibility in their job, because they're not getting, or are unable to get, the flexibility that office workers have gotten with remote work. And we
Yeah.
studied that during COVID, obviously, because that was a little bit of the two-tiered workforce. One's getting the ability to work remote, the other one can't work remote.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, and one of the big findings, we did a whole study around this, was schedule flexibility was the answer for the frontline worker.
Right.
So AI cannot replace, adequate staffing levels, or um, resolve like these structural workforce strategies that require much more work and institutional and organizational buy-in. But it can definitely improve the day-to-day experience
Yeah.
with it, which I think is what we need to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, sort of in your presentation, you were really talking about how employees don't necessarily fear being, kind of directly replaced, but maybe a little bit sidelined. So it sounds like, leaders really should be kind of having those conversations early about the implementation of AI. Like, how can sort of leaders involve frontline workers a bit more so that they feel empowered and not necessarily excluded, especially when you've got maybe people like you were saying, from different generations, different age groups with, you might be surprised. There might be boomers in your workplace who are really, kind of into AI and looking for those solutions. So what are sort of some of the advice that you can give there?
I think the biggest thing is we call it the voice of the employee. And
Mm,
this is not just for frontline workers, this is for any workforce. We studied this, of course, during the pandemic. This is a big topic, or a little bit after the pandemic. And I think that this is just a universal topic. It's extremely important because we live in a world where people want to feel like they're part of the development of a product, or the development of a workforce environment or culture. Like people want to feel like they're part of it. And as a result, getting feedback from them, involving them in a pilot of a new AI tool, and saying,
mm,
"Is this working for you? Is it not? What could be better? What aspects of your job would this be useful in?" Like that's going to be very, very helpful, instead of just saying, "Hey, we have this AI tool. Good luck." Like that's not going to work. Or we think that this AI tool is going to remove this from your workday or something. Like that's just not the right way to do it. It's obviously having the strategy and being thoughtful around the tool, but also like getting that feedback is critical, because these are the people who are going to actually be using it, not as much these, you know, CHROs or CEOs, right? Like it's mostly going to be, frontline managers, frontline employees that are going to be using it for scheduling, communication, all these different applications.
absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely those workers that are on the tools, so to speak. So these are questions for either one of you, really. So there's a question here about, sort of where frontline workers don't necessarily currently encounter AI, or they don't recognize that it exists in their workplace. Like, can we talk a little bit about the kind of awareness a gap, why that might exist, and how employers can close it? Because it might actually be the case that workplaces are actually using more AI than they would realize.
Maybe I can start off on this
Yeah.
one, and Dan, you can add to it. Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time in the last few months speaking to frontline teams who are, experimenting with AI and thinking about how they can introduce it into their workflows. Um, and something that I've noticed is that often it will start with the management team. And so those managers are the ones who are kind of holding the pencil on this technology. They're wanting to test it really thoroughly. They're wanting to make sure it kind of works really well before they then involve their teams.
Mm,
And that's a really interesting trend. And I'm noticing that there's this real fear of rolling something out that's not perfect. Uh, and so that means that the actual frontline workers who will probably benefit the most from the technology aren't given that opportunity to be aware of it, to be testing it, like Dan was talking about before, to be able to really understand, is this going to work in my context? Is it really going to solve the problem? And so in that scenario, I guess I have a few recommendations. I think the first would be try to not be too caught up with perfection. So
mm,
a lot of AI is, getting better and better every week. And so it may not be completely perfect today. And just because it's not perfect doesn't mean it's not useful. So sometimes it'll get you 90% of the way, but it's really that human judgment and oversight that gets you that last 10% to really, get the outcome that you want. And
mm,
that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you can save 90% of the effort and time on something and you're only putting in that last 10%, that's really good for you. That's a really good thing for the business. So there's that little bit of learning how to work with this new type of technology that isn't 100% perfect, and having comfort in that. And then also to Dan's point, involving your team in that testing process. AI is one of those things where you kind of need to use it to understand it. And so getting your team involved will really help you make a faster decision about whether that tool makes sense in the context. Is it really going to solve the problem? Your team are going to have the best judgment on that because they're the one who, will be using it day to day. And then my last point would be don't limit the thinking on ideas and solutions and how AI can help your business just to your management team. I'd really encourage that sort of bottom up innovation, that some of those best ideas can come directly from that team because, they're in the thick of the day to day. They will probably see those opportunities and it could be really helpful. So allow that, like bottom up ideation and testing and exploration to happen as well.
Yeah, and that really sort of speaks to this idea of we're experimenting, we're testing something, it's okay to fail, and a lot of that has to be, I guess, really sort of centered in this idea of AI meeting empathy, and we're kind of all going on a bit of a journey here together, and that actually can be quite exciting, I think, for teams. Do you have anything to add to that, Dan?
Yeah, so I really like that idea, but I would add on you need a culture and a management team that supports trial and error,
That can
right?
do that,
So
yeah.
almost like you've seen a lot of these tech companies like do hackathons. I don't know if you're familiar, but like the Metas and the Microsoft used to have like Microsoft Garage, and I know that Meta has had like hackathons where they're like you have a certain amount of time and you got to come up with these concepts. And it's like if you don't come up with the best concept, you don't like get fired or anything. Just like in this respect, if you want to use AI, like anyone who uses AI, you get a bonus or you get a trip or whatever, you get a hotel room for the night. Anything like that, I think is pretty interesting, right? Instead
Mm,
of like if you take a risk, you're less likely to take a risk if you know that it could hurt your job prospects. So
yeah,
I think supporting risk taking is key, especially in today's environment where things are evolving so fast. Like, how can you not take any risks? And so I think that's really key.
yeah,
And also, I would say, going back to what I was saying earlier, is training. I look at the work we've done. I look at all these other studies that are out and all these leaders, and it comes back to there's just a lack of training. Again, it's what we got to use AI. Our shareholders want us to use AI. Our leadership wants us to use AI. Just use the tools. Instead, it's hey, let's be thoughtful in terms of what tool we're using, how we're going to implement it, how we're going to communicate it to the team. Let's do, as Kat was saying, some experimentation. Like it's the approach by which you introduce and then support and then train that will lead to success or failure.
yeah,
But
definitely. And
as
I
an
think,
individual standpoint, just like I was saying before, it's like, think about using AI outside of work. If
mm,
you have not used it before or afraid, just, there's zero risk taking in opening up ChatGPT or Claude or some other tool and saying, I'm looking for this new cake recipe, or whatever, right? Like I'm looking to make, some sort of dish, or I'm looking to travel to Australia, what should I pack or something? Like
yeah.
even if you're not going to Australia because it's especially from here, it's a pretty long flight. The idea is simple. It's you're learning how to use it, right? You're learning how to have the conversation and what to ask and how to respond and how to go deeper and all these different. That's going to give you a little bit of a comfort level. So when you're in the workplace, you're like, wait a second, there's so much I can do here, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
the idea. That's the idea.
yeah,
And the unique part about AI relative to other technology movements like the metaverse, let's say, metaverse is a little pie in the sky. Like, you, how are you going to just jump in the metaverse for free? Like, it's not going to happen. But with AI, like you can open a chat GPT, create an account in 5 seconds using Google and then start using it in 3 seconds for free. Like there's no cost to it. And so the
yeah,
the no friction or barriers of entry and your ability to just start whenever, like it's almost like there's no excuses to at least try and experiment on your own.
yeah, absolutely. And I really like that idea of, you know, bringing in kind of a bit of play to it, sort of just playing around, really leaning into the experience of AI. And I think that's quite a natural thing for our industry to be able to do. A lot of restaurants and hospitality businesses are very sort of experience and, very creative as well. So, I think that's really great advice. Kat, a question for you, because I know that you're really sort of in the weeds of, deputy AI. You're really on the tools there. If a business is just getting started with AI, particularly in, I guess, sort of workforce management, which is, obviously sort of deputy specialism, like where would they start? What sort of advice do you have for them?
Yeah, sure. I think my first piece of advice, it's kind of really generic and it applies to any workplace really. It's that you need to set aside the time to think about it and to try things and experiment. I think particularly in these frontline businesses, like you're so busy all the time, you're always fighting fires, you're dealing with customers, there's always something that's urgent. And so it's really easy to just stay in this pattern of doing things in the same way that you've always done because it's urgent and you're busy, and not creating that time and space to actually explore new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So my first big sort of piece of advice is like create that structured time and like solid blocks of time, like a few hours, where you're really giving yourself that ability to really think and reflect and explore and research. So that's first. In terms of introducing AI into your business and using it in workforce management, I kind of see two main categories of AI. So that is like really obviously useful for these businesses. The first one would be these large language models. So like your ChatGPT, your Claude, and so on. These tend to be generically useful, particularly for things like content creation. So if you're writing or you're reviewing content, you're summarizing, you're wanting to create images, maybe if you're a hospitality business, you're trying to redesign your menu and you want to check, is this menu friendly for people with different allergies, stuff like that. So they're the kinds of things that these general purpose large language models can be really good at. The other thing is that they can be a really good thought partner for you. So you can chat with it, you can get ideas, you can let it critique ideas. Even if you're not sure how to use AI in your business, you could actually ask a large language model to help you with that. You could say, these are all the tasks I do in my day to day. What could you help me with? Or give me ideas for how AI can help me with these things. So it can be a really good thought partner. The second big category of AI solutions in my mind, they're AI features that sit within existing software. So this would be like Deputy AI within Deputy, or it could be like, if you use spreadsheets on Google, there's like the Gemini side panel where you can get it to help you with formulas or formatting or to help you get insights. So these are AI features that sit embedded within software.
Yeah.
What's so different and so powerful about these kind of features is that actually they have access to all of the context and data that sits within that software platform. So, for example, with Deputy, it knows you, it knows your business, it can see your schedule, it knows all of your team members, it knows who's currently working, it can even see who's clocked in, who's clocked out. It knows how people are feeling because we have a survey that we send to people after every shift where they can rate how they're feeling, they can give comments and feedback. So it has access to all of this data, context, and information. And it can also perform actions on your behalf or on your request. So that's really powerful. It means that you can use it to help you find a last minute replacement. You can use it to give you insights about how your team is feeling. You can use it to make like a massive bulk update to your schedule for the next month. Like if your shift times have changed from, a 9 a.m. start to a 10 a.m. start, you can, in one prompt, ask it to change all of those shifts in one go for you, which if you had to manually update them all one by one, it would take you ages.
Yeah.
So these are the things that, I'd sort of recommend just experimenting with and trying. They can really help you. I think just understanding what's the difference between these different categories of AI, what they're good at, what they're not good at, giving it a go. And you can really see that they can be very powerful.
Yeah. And I guess also, working with, companies like Deputy, you guys, you've got really big online knowledge bases, lots of advice and help and support. So it's also a case of leaning on the tools themselves to really kind of help, steer the ship. So thank you so much, Dan and Kat. We are kind of at time, but I think you've given everyone here a lot to think about. And I think the message that is really staying with me is that empathy isn't the opposite of innovation. It's actually what makes it sustainable. And I think that's something that's worth taking back to, all of our teams. So thank you to everyone who joined us today on the call. Just a reminder that the recording will be sent by the team at Deputy, so keep an eye out for that in your inboxes. And if today's conversation has got you thinking about the wider future of frontline work, keep an eye out for the Restaurant and Food Service Show this May. It's going to be a brilliant opportunity to continue these exact conversations and connect with providers like Deputy in person. So they are exhibiting at the show. So come along, meet the team, explore these types of solutions. And yeah, take care, everyone. Thanks again for being here. It was a really great conversation.
Thank you.